I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am. My name is Samantha, I'm 27, and a few months ago I was a full-time student who slept in the back seat of a faded Honda Civic, showered at a 24-hour gym, and worked 2 jobs just to keep my grades from slipping through my fingers. I had a trust fund once. Money my dad set aside so I could become the first woman in our family to earn a graduate degree. By the time I needed it most, that fund had mysteriously thinned while my stepmother and her children enjoyed brand new comforts, a redecorated house, and a treadmill that somehow cost more than my car. If you've ever had to start over with nothing but stubbornness and a heartbeat, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've had family treat your future like it was theirs to spend, hit like and subscribe so this story gets to someone who needs it too, because the way this turns will make you choose a side. I wasn't born into chaos. My first memories are lavender paint and a window seat my dad built with his own hands, a backyard garden where my mom taught me patience by pressing pea seeds into soft dirt, Sunday pancakes that came out lopsided because dad flipped them too early, and movie nights where he insisted popcorn absolutely counted as a vegetable. We lived outside Boston in a 4-bedroom house that smelled like cinnamon in December and fresh grass in June. We weren't flashy, we were steady. My uncle Walter, dad's older brother, was the glamorous one. Real estate, flights, a house with a staircase that split in 2 like a theater set. He loved us loudly. Every Christmas he hosted a party where the tree brushed the ceiling and everyone left with a book wrapped in velvet paper. He and dad met for lunch every Thursday, an unbreakable ritual. He never had kids. I was his only niece and he spoiled me in the kind of way that made me believe the world was mostly kind. When I was 12, kindness felt like it switched off. My mom's headaches turned into scans, then into a word no one says in kitchens with little girls standing near the dishwasher. Tumor. Inoperable. Aggressive. We counted months in appointments and pill organizers. Dad learned to negotiate with insurance companies at midnight and still make pancakes at dawn. I learned to heat soup without boiling it over and how to braid my mom's hair gently so her scalp wouldn't ache. She lived 8 months after the 6 they gave her, long enough to see the irises open in spring. She died on a morning so beautiful it felt like the sky had no manners. Grief made the house bigger and emptier at the same time. Dad started working longer hours. The photos on the mantel made the air heavy. Uncle Walter still came, but the Thursday lunches sputtered and stopped. Something about a disagreement I wasn't old enough to be told about. We built a new rhythm. Early breakfasts together on Saturdays, then I did homework while Dad met clients. We kept going because going is what you do. 2 years later, Dad smiled in a way I hadn't seen since the hospital smell left our clothes. Her name was Diana. She worked in marketing for a client of the company. She wore perfect tan pumps and knew how to ask the kinds of questions that make you feel interesting. He had 2 kids, Brandon and Zoe. The first dinner went like a rehearsal. Everyone friendly, everyone careful. I wanted it to work. Dad deserved uncomplicated happiness. 6 months later, they married in a small ceremony with white hydrangeas and music that sounded like a commercial for a convertible. They moved in the next week as if they had always lived there. Brandon took the guest room. Zoe got the office after Dad converted it. "Your room has lovely light," Diana said, standing in my doorway the way an appraiser does. "Zoe's art would thrive here. You girls can share, it'll help you bond." When Dad was home, Diana was honey. When he wasn't, she became a manager who had read too many leadership books. My chores became standards. My preferences became obstacles. My mother's photos migrated to boxes for safekeeping. Our ornaments didn't surface this year. The pancake tradition suddenly wasn't nutritious. The new traditions looked suspiciously like Diana's old ones. Dad was gone earlier, home later, flattered by a woman who called his work ethic heroic and arranged his calendar like a conductor. Money entered the conversation through compliments. "David, you're so generous with Samantha's education plan," she'd say lightly. "And of course Brandon's commute next year will mean a car. Safety first. And Zoe's studio needs ventilation. Art supplies are so particular." Dad said yes the way tired men do. By 16 I was fluent in absence. I learned which drawer still held a photo of my mother behind warranty manuals. I learned to make myself smaller in a house that had been built around my height. When I asked about a school trip, Diana pinched the bridge of her nose like someone doing you the favor of a headache. "College is expensive, Samantha. We can't say yes to every little thing." She said this beside a catalog dog-eared on pages that looked like my bedroom but bigger. When Dad was around, she encouraged us to be a team. When he was gone, the team fielded 2 captains and I wasn't one of them. Then the accident took away the only person who could tell me I wasn't imagining the shift. Chemistry class. A knock at the classroom door, the principal with a face that had practiced this expression. A red light, a truck, internal injuries. The waiting room chairs turned into a pattern I still see when I close my eyes. Diana spoke to the doctors with the certainty of someone who likes microphones. I held Dad's hand and told him about the beach last summer, how he made a castle with a moat even though he knew the tide would win, how I would make him proud. Machines hummed. 3 hours later, the hum sounded like silence. 17 felt like a sinkhole. Funerals reveal the editor in every family. The service was at a church Dad never attended, arranged by a minister who had met him that morning. The eulogy made him sound like a boardroom. There was no jazz, no pancake jokes, no reference to how he always cried at the end of sports movies. Diana cried in the front row, beautiful and precise. Brandon looked wounded, Zoe looked small. Uncle Walter was a shadow near the door. When he stepped close, he pressed a card into my palm and said, "Call me when you can. We need to talk." Then he disappeared the way people do when grief is crowded with politics. 3 days later came the will. Dad had updated it after the wedding. The business went to Diana with the expectation it would eventually be mine. The house to Diana with a clause that I could live there until I finished college. My education trust remained mine, but with Diana named trustee until I was 25. There was a separate inheritance at 25. The lawyer said it like good news. Diana squeezed my hand with a grip that said ownership. "We'll be very responsible," she told the room, and the room didn't say anything back. That night she held a family meeting like a CEO previewing a merger. "Practical arrangements," she began. "Samantha, you'll move into the small room upstairs. Brandon needs your space for his equipment and study zone." I said it was my room since I could remember. She smiled with her teeth. "This is my home now. We all have to make sacrifices." Brandon and Zoe moved my things while I was at school the next day. Some of my mother's keepsakes didn't survive the trip. The attic space I got had sloped ceilings and a vent that clanked like a loose thought. The thermostat began to ignore that corner of the house. Diana discovered the phrase fiduciary duty and wore it like perfume. Receipts became rituals. She inspected my spending like I was embezzling her future. Brandon got a car for safety. Zoe's art camp tuition cleared in a day. My laptop request sat in purgatory until the family desktop's hard drive died heroically during one of Brandon's downloads. The message was constant, just varied enough to sound new. "You are lucky to be here. Gratitude looks like silence." I made a plan the way people do when planning is the thing you can control. I studied like a job. I took a part-time shift at the bookstore and hid the money in an account with a bank Diana didn't know. I applied to Northeastern because it felt like a place where ambition wasn't a joke. The thick envelope came on a Wednesday. I opened it in the attic with the clanking vent and cried onto the acceptance letter until the ink blushed. For a minute I swore I could hear Dad telling me to frame it. When I told Diana, she skimmed the letter the way you skim a label for allergens. "Northeastern is very expensive," she said. "Given the business climate, your trust may not sustain that. Community college could be wise." I reminded her my father built that fund for exactly this reason, and that it wasn't a weather vane. She exhaled through her nose. "As trustee, I must ensure it lasts. No extravagances." Extravagance apparently included a campus meal plan, a metro pass, and a laptop that didn't require a sacrificial reboot every hour. Tuition got paid, after documentation, but everything else came with a sermon. College was oxygen. Dorm air is stale, sure, but it's shared. My roommate Jessica and I carved a home out of cinder block and extension cords. I joined 2 student groups, found a mentor, and started to sound like myself again when I spoke. I went home only when I had to. Each time there was less of me in that house. My childhood became boxes in a damp garage stacked beside seasonal decor Diana bought in bulk. She was always monitoring the trust closely. I was always reassured. The summer after sophomore year, I stayed in Boston for an internship and learned the pleasure of reading in an apartment that belonged to people my age. Fall brought a surprise. Diana invited me for an important financial discussion. The dining room table was laid with spreadsheets like a warning. "The business is struggling," she said. "The trust has underperformed. We'll cover tuition, but housing and living expenses are now your responsibility. Temporarily. I asked to see the trust statements. Her eyes iced. I won't be interrogated. Your father appointed me for a reason. I went to student legal services and learned the law is a ladder you climb with evidence and time. I had neither. I added a second job. I learned Boston on foot, how long it takes to make it from my last class to the restaurant before a manager asks where you've been. My grades drooped and I shaped them upright at 3 a.m. When summer came again, I went home because rent had become the kind of math I couldn't win. My bedroom was gone, converted into a gym with a treadmill that still smelled like plastic and a rack of weights no one used yet. You're hardly here, Diana said. The space needed purpose. You can sleep on the sofa. My possessions were in boxes that had learned to slouch in humidity. I was in the garage trying to salvage my mother's photo album when I heard voices from the kitchen. The door was cracked. The house had good acoustics the day betrayal wanted to be heard. The trust has been a lifesaver, Diana said, like a woman complimenting a coupon. We'd have lost the business. Brandon, sounding like a man who believed he'd built something, asked, "How long can we do that?" Diana's answer was careful. Until she turns 25 or finishes. I'm transferring small amounts as investment adjustments. On paper it looks legitimate. By the time she questions it, it will be integrated. What if she figures it out? She has no access and no money to fight. Your grandfather, she always called my father that around her kids as if Connor McCullough, a man she never met, had taught her these tricks, was meticulous. The files reflect market losses. It's airtight. I stood very still and learned what a pulse sounds like when it moves to your ears. Confrontation would get me theatrics and a locked door. Evidence and distance might get me a life. The next morning I told Diana I had found summer housing in Boston with friends. It wasn't true. What I had was a hatchback, a gym membership, a job at a coffee shop that opened at 6, and the kind of fear that makes you organized. Sleeping in a car is a series of choices. You choose safety over sleep and routine over comfort. I joined a cheap 24-hour gym for showers, figured out which locker far in the corner was least likely to be opened by accident, learned to shower at 5:30 when no one cares how long you take. I rotated parking lots. The back edge of a Walmart, a quiet street near campus with a broken streetlight, the top level of a mall garage where security noticed everyone but also no one. Hospitals made good last resort options. Too many people coming and going to bother with a lone sedan. I put my clothes in roll-up vacuum bags in the trunk, my documents and laptop in a backpack that never left my shoulder. I bought a cooler and filled it with ice from the coffee shop machine at the end of my shift. I kept wet wipes in the glove box and a spare pair of flats under the seat because sometimes shoes break precisely when your life is trying not to. Mornings began in the gym bathroom with a mirror that pretended nothing was wrong. I braided my hair, steamed the wrinkles out of my uniform with the hand dryer, and put on a smile that looked less tired if you didn't know me. The coffee shop became a stage and a refuge. People told me their orders and their worries. They tipped in quarters and kindness. Free staff coffee kept my heart rate unwise but my mind sharp. On good days I ate a breakfast sandwich the manager would have thrown out anyway. On bad days I told myself hunger made me focused. After my shift I studied at the library until my eyes burned. I learned which librarians smiled without questions and which ones offered quiet water bottles in a way that said they understood things I didn't want to say out loud. Evenings I worked at a clothing store folding shirts into rectangles as if straight edges could fix everything. I wrote essays in the break room between customers, standing so I wouldn't fall asleep. Summer heat turned the Civic into a sauna. I cracked the windows and worried about safety. Rain turned everything damp. I bought desiccant packs like I was improving a museum exhibit. A cop tapped on my glass one night and asked if I was okay. I said I was waiting for a friend and he nodded like people do when they want to believe the better version. I woke up sometimes with my heart galloping and the imprint of the seat belt across my cheek. Kept going. Survival is a verb. When fall returned, classes layered over the jobs. I arranged my schedule like Tetris and lost often. I wore clean clothes and a calm face because that was the only camouflage I could afford. Dr. Patel, my marketing professor, asked me after class if I was all right. I told her I was working extra to save for grad school. She gave me an extension without calling me a liar. I cried in a bathroom stall quietly because dignity is loud in small spaces. 3 months into living on wheels, Fate put on a navy blazer and walked into my coffee shop at 10:17 a.m. The morning rush had thinned. I was wiping the counter the exact same way I do in every restaurant I've ever worked when a voice ordered a black coffee with the exact hint of impatience only old Boston money can produce. I looked up and saw a face I hadn't been close to since the funeral. Uncle Walter had gone gray around the edges and narrower in the cheeks, but his eyes were the same, sharp, assessing, kind when they landed. He looked at me, at my name tag, at the dark crescents under my eyes, at the way my uniform sat on a frame thinner than it used to be. "Samantha?" he said like a question that hoped the answer was no. I nodded because pretending is exhausting. "Hi, Uncle Walter." His mouth opened and closed once. He stepped aside to let the next customer pass and said, "When do you take your break?" I checked the clock. 2. He nodded. "I'll be back." He left a tip that looked like embarrassment and something else I couldn't name. The 4 hours to 2 o'clock lasted a week. When I finally clocked out, I found him waiting in a car that made my Civic look like a toy. He suggested lunch. We drove to a cafe that served sandwiches with greens that had names. He didn't ask performative questions. He just waited while I picked at bread and finally told him everything. Not the tidy version. The one with attic vents and spreadsheets and overheard kitchen confessions. The one with shower schedules and top deck parking lots and the exact price of a gym membership that buys you the right to pretend you belong. He listened without interrupting, except once to put his hand over mine when my voice shook. "I had no idea," he said when I ran out of breath. "I should have stayed closer." His jaw worked like he was chewing a different kind of guilt. "This ends today. No niece of mine sleeps in a car while that woman spends your future like it's store credit." He asked me to show him the Civic. We stood in a strip mall lot while he looked in the trunk at vacuum bags and a cooler, at a pillow with coffee stains, at the way I had become good at small spaces. He took a breath like a man about to lift something heavy. "Pack what you need for tonight," he said. "You're coming with me." I started to say I didn't want to be a burden. He cut me off with exactly the right amount of softness. "Your family. And your father would haunt me if I let you spend one more night like this." He said it like a promise rather than a performance, and I believed him because believing felt like sleep for the first time in months. That night I slept in a bed with corners tucked by someone who has done it often. His housekeeper had placed fresh towels on a chair and a glass of water on the nightstand like people do in actual homes. The sheets smelled like something expensive and clean. I woke up twice in a panic and then remembered where I was and cried because safety can be loud. Over breakfast the next morning, eggs I didn't cook, coffee not poured from a shift carafe, Walter said, "My attorney is available at 10. We'll go together. You'll tell him what you told me." "And Samantha?" He waited until I looked up. "We're going to pull every record. If there's a trail, we'll find it." I nodded, the kind of nod that has its own gravity. The story you're listening to changed in that moment, but the turning of it is its own chapter. If you've made it this far, you already know I don't dramatize what doesn't need it. I'm telling you this because someone out there is keeping receipts in a notebook and wondering if it matters. It does. And if you want to hear exactly how we took back what was mine and what that cost the people who thought I'd stay quiet, stick with me. Like and subscribe so you don't miss the next part, because the paper trail we found didn't just expose a theft. It exposed a plan. And bringing a plan into daylight is how you end it. I woke up in a room that smelled like starch and quiet money, the kind of room where the nightstand already knows what you'll need: water, tissues, a lamp that clicks on softly. For the first time in months, I didn't bolt upright at 3 a.m. because a security cart rattled past my car. The first thing I saw when the curtains bled light was a note in Uncle Walter's handwriting. "Attorney at 10. Eat first." It made me laugh and want to cry at the same time. At breakfast, Walter watched me the way people watch someone stepping off a ship after a long crossing, measuring for sea legs ready to catch. "You tell the truth," he said. "We'll do the rest." At 10 on the dot, we walked into a glass office high enough over Boston that the city looked organized. The receptionist said Mr. Levin would be right with us. I caught my reflection in the lobby's black marble and blinked at the girl wearing my face. Thinner, older around the eyes, and still there. Ethan Levin shook my hand like a man who believes in documents. He didn't waste my courage. "Start at the beginning," he said, and I did. Dates, amounts, phrases, the overheard kitchen confession word for word. He listened without interrupting except to ask precise questions. "Exact date she told you housing would no longer be covered? Which account the tuition draws came from?" Did she ever provide you a trust accounting? When I said no, he nodded once as if a puzzle piece had snapped into place. We're filing an emergency petition this afternoon, he said when I finished. Removal of trustee, temporary restraining order, and a freeze on all trust-related accounts. We'll also demand a full accounting 5 years back. If funds have been diverted, the paper will show it. It always does. He glanced at Walter. I'll bring in a forensic accountant. If there are transfers into the business, we'll track them. Walter didn't speak like a rich man, he spoke like a brother. Whatever she took, he told me, we'll make them prove they had the right. And if they can't, we'll get it back. By 3 o'clock that same day, a judge I'd never met had signed orders that felt like a scaffold under my feet. Accounts frozen. Diana barred from making any decision regarding the trust until a hearing 10 days later. I didn't know you could buy time with paper. Mr. Levin's paralegal slid a copy of the order across the table. I traced the judge's stamped name with my fingertip like it was the handle of a door I'd wanted for years. The forensic accountant arrived 2 mornings later with a canvas tote bag and the demeanor of someone who likes puzzles more than people. Maya Quintero, she said, shaking my hand. I break down stories told in numbers. She spent the first hour in Walter's study mapping entities. The trust, the business's line of credit, and 2 personal accounts that should never have been in the same sentence as my name. If there's a siphon, she said, it will show up in the cadence. Repeated transfers just below reporting thresholds, odd investment line items, trustee fees that creep. We ate sandwiches at Walter's kitchen island while she explained to me, slowly and without condescension, what commingling means, what a trustee is allowed to do and what they aren't. It isn't complicated, Maya said, sliding a legal pad toward me with a neat sketch of buckets and arrows. Trust money is a walled garden. Your education and reasonable support live inside. Diana's business lives outside. If she opened a gate in the wall without a judge's permission, she doesn't just owe the garden back, she owes the time the garden would have had to grow. Those 10 days felt like the hinge of a door I'd been pushing against for years. I worked a light shift at the coffee shop because routine made me steady, then studied in a chair that didn't fold and slept in a bed that didn't require me to crack windows. I let myself exhale in pieces. In the evenings, Walter told stories I'd never heard. About Dad fixing a leaking sink himself at a property because he didn't want to bill a tenant. About the way Dad would call him on Thursdays to ask about a real estate deal and end up talking about pancakes instead. The kind of stories that fill in corners you didn't know were empty. On day 8, Maya slid a thick, tabbed binder across Mr. Levin's conference table. Here's your cadence, she said. 3 years of investment transfers out of the trust into the business. Never papered as loans, no interest, no board approval. The amounts are strategic, $4,950, $6,200. Under thresholds that trigger extra eyes in some systems. Trustee fees paid to Diana at a rate that would make a seasoned fiduciary blush. And, she tapped a page, 2 tuition payments reversed, then reissued through the business operating account, which is a very odd way to pay a beneficiary's school. If I were being uncharitable, I'd call it laundering optics. How much? Walter asked, his jaw tightening. $206,387 and some cents, plus the growth it should have had. Rough math, you're short well over $250,000. I stared at the columns. The numbers looked like a language I suddenly understood. My housing. My meals. The quiet, ordinary dignity of a young adult life not shaped around scarcity. There was, in black ink. Mr. Levin's eyes didn't change, but his pen stopped moving. We'll amend the petition, he said. Restitution with interest. Immediate removal for cause. And we'll notify the DA. The pattern is willful. The hearing was in a courtroom that smelled like old promises. Diana arrived in a cream suit with a pearl at her throat and a lawyer who looked like he'd been told this would be routine. Brandon and Zoe sat in the second row, pretending not to see me. When the judge called our case, Diana's attorney opened with smooth words about volatile markets, family emergencies, and temporary reallocations. Mr. Levin waited for him to finish, then said 6 sentences that felt like a blade. No loan documents. No interest accrual. Repeated transfers timed to avoid flags. Excessive trustee compensation. Personal expenses from trust assets. And a beneficiary who slept in a car. Silence in a courtroom feels like a change in weather. The judge looked at Diana for the first time and asked very softly, "Is that last point accurate?" Diana's mouth twitched. "Samantha has always preferred independence. We offered her a place in our home." "On the sofa," I said before I could stop myself. Mr. Levin's hand hovered in a tiny warning and then settled, as if even he couldn't blame a crack in composure. Maya walked the judge through 4 charts, each a picture of a rule tripped over. The judge's questions were precise and, to my ears, increasingly incredulous. At the end she removed Diana on the spot, appointed Walter interim trustee, ordered a full accounting within 30 days, froze a raft of accounts, and set a status hearing to discuss restitution and referrals. It took less than 20 minutes to unwind 3 years of "you're lucky I let you stay." Outside the courtroom, Diana caught my arm. "You always did like an audience," she hissed. "Enjoy it. It won't last." I stepped back so her fingers fell away. "I didn't bring the audience," I said. "You brought the records. If you're still with me, tell me in the comments. Would you have pushed for criminal charges or taken a settlement and walked away? I'm curious how you'd play it. And hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest, because what we found next wasn't just money. It was a map." The DA's office took Maya's binder like a gift. "We see a lot of sloppy trustees," the assistant DA said, flipping through tabs. "This isn't sloppy. This is deliberate." They opened a white-collar investigation. Mr. Levin pushed the civil case ahead with the efficiency of a man who collects verbs. A week later we were in a conference room again, this time across from Diana and a different lawyer. Older, sweatier, more expensive. He tried outrage first, then pity, then a lecture about family being harmed by public proceedings. Mr. Levin offered him a single page: restitution of principal plus projected growth, disgorgement of trustee fees, resignation from any role at the company, and a stipulation of facts the DA could use if she wanted. "There's no prison on this paper," Mr. Levin said evenly, "but there is a future. If your client signs it by 5. Diana stared at the page like ink had personally offended her. Brandon shifted. Zoe stared at the carpet. The older lawyer asked for the room. When he came back, the pearl at Diana's throat had a hairline crack in it. "We'll agree to the civil terms," he said, "without admitting wrongdoing." Mr. Levin didn't smile. "We'll file the stipulation as part of the settlement," he said. "The documents will speak." Diana signed. Her name looked less certain than it used to. As she slid the pen back, she glanced at me. For a second, something like recognition flickered. Of me as my father's, of herself as something other than the hero of her own story. Then it was gone. Walter became trustee with the court's blessing, which meant statements arrived addressed to him and me. He insisted we sit together once a week to go through them. "Transparency is how you starve ghosts," he said, and I felt something unclench that I didn't know had curled. Within a month, the restitution landed in the trust. The business ownership shifted into a professional manager's hands under a neutral board, and the treadmill in my old bedroom probably became a coat rack. My day-to-day changed in ways that looked small from the outside and enormous from where I lived. I moved into a little apartment near campus with a door that clicked and a window that faced a tree. I kept the coffee shop job because I liked knowing people's orders by heart, but I let the clothing store go. I bought a second-hand laptop that didn't freeze when it saw a spreadsheet and a cheap bike that made Boston smaller. The first evening in my new place, I cooked an actual meal, pan-seared chicken, rice, broccoli, and cried over the steam because a stove is a kind of safety. Dr. Patel called me into her office after class one day and said, "I don't know the details and you don't owe me any, but I'm glad you're okay." She wrote a recommendation that later would mean more than she knew. I slept all the way through the night twice that week and woke up confused to find morning already there. I stopped keeping my backpack between me and the world when I sat down. Maya, who had become a kind of quiet hero to me, dropped off a thin folder one Friday. "For your records," she said. Inside was a timeline, a list of red flags, and a one-page plain English explanation of my rights as a beneficiary. At the bottom she'd written a sentence that startled me with its tenderness. "You didn't imagine it." I kept that page folded in my desk, and on bad days I touched it like a talisman. The DA offered Diana a plea. A felony reduced to a misdemeanor if she completed a long list of conditions. Restitution, already done. Community service, a permanent bar from serving as a fiduciary, a financial ethics course, and probation. He took it. Brandon and Zoe left the state. I heard secondhand that Brandon called the outcome unfair, and Zoe cried in a way that sounded more like loss than outrage. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. With the emergency over, Walter and I filled in the emptier spaces. He told me why the Thursday lunches with Dad had stopped. Something about a warning he tried to give, something about pride and grief colliding. He thought I couldn't understand what it is to be in a family, Walter said, looking out a window big enough to make you think the world is tidy. He didn't know how much I wanted to be in his. He cleared his throat. He would be proud of what you did. Proud in the way that makes a man stand up a little taller even if no one's looking. He surprised me one afternoon by pulling a small wooden cigar box from a shelf. "Your father left this with me the week after your mother died," he said. "He made me promise to give it to you when you were ready." I thought I'd already missed the moment. Inside was a key wrapped in a bandana that smelled faintly like Dad's aftershave, and a note in his handwriting that scraped something raw and sweet inside me. "For when you need to know you were never alone. Box 317. It took me a minute to understand. A safe deposit box. A place for things you want to outlast mistakes. We went to the bank together. The clerk escorted us into a vault that looked like a movie set and left us at a small metal drawer. Walter turned away while I slid the key in and pulled out an envelope and a flash drive. I opened the letter first. Dad's voice walked out of those lines like he'd been practicing in another room. He wrote about my mother's calm in storms, about the day he and Mom decided to create the trust, about how love sometimes looks like paperwork. Then he wrote a paragraph I read 3 times. "If grief makes me foolish and I choose poorly, this is your backstop. Ask Walter to take you to Mr. Kwan at the bank. He knows where the rest is." My hands shook. I looked up at Walter. He had tears on his face he didn't wipe away. Mr. Kwan was still at the bank, older, with silver hair and a memory that unfurled names like ribbon. He took us into a private room and pulled up a screen. "Your father was a practical romantic," he said to me. "He set up an education trust you know about, and a rain day account you didn't. He asked me not to mention it unless you brought his letter." He turned the screen so I could see. A conservative investment account, untouched, modest by Walter's standards but monumental by mine. "He wanted one thing he knew would never be within reach of anyone you didn't choose," Mr. Kwan said. "I'm glad you came." I walked out of that bank into bright afternoon with a feeling I hadn't had since the lavender room with the window seat. Held. Not by money. By intent. By the truth that my parents had built a net for me even as they were slipping away. I wish I could tell you that's where the story ends, with a bow and a lesson learned. But life is less like a bow and more like a braid. You keep weaving. I still jumped sometimes when a car door slammed. I still woke at 3 a.m. on certain nights with my body convinced we had to move the car. I still stocked a little plastic bin in my hall closet with emergency snacks and a flashlight and a spare charger because preparedness had gotten confused with safety in my nervous system. Walter gently suggested therapy. "Brains like yours," he said, "deserve a chance to put the story back on the right shelves." He was right. I asked Dr. Patel for a recommendation and 3 weeks later walked into a small office where a woman named Dr. Morales had plants that were doing well and a chair that didn't squeak. She didn't treat me like a problem to be fixed. She treated me like a person who had been very resourceful in a very hard season. "Hypervigilance kept you safe," she said, "so we're going to thank it before we teach it new jobs." We worked on things I'd never had time for. Breathing that isn't decorative, routines that tell your body it's okay, the radical idea that rest is not laziness. On the 3rd session she asked me to list things I wanted that weren't survival. I wrote "Finish with Honors," "Buy Uncle Walter dinner without him grabbing the bill," and "Sleep without planning an exit." I trimmed my hours at the coffee shop to weekends and poured myself into classes. A case study on corporate governance felt personal in a way that surprised my professor. I wrote a paper on fiduciary ethics that made Mr. Levin grin when I emailed him a copy. I started volunteering 1 night a week at a student resource center where we asked questions universities are bad at asking. Do you have a safe place to sleep? Do you have something to eat that didn't come out of a vending machine? Do you know where to shower that doesn't cost you dignity? I didn't tell anyone my story there. I didn't need to. I knew the map of certain looks and how to answer them without making anyone explain more than they wanted. Midterms came and went and my grades looked like someone else's in the good way. Walter and I kept our Sunday dinners. Sometimes fancy, sometimes frozen pizza on good plates. He told me he was impressed by the new management at Dad's company. "They're boring," he said cheerfully. "Boring saves companies." He asked if I'd like to sit in on a board call as an observer. I said yes and spent the next week Googling terms I pretended to know. On the call, the new CEO walked through cash flow and procurement like a man narrating a careful hike. No dramatics, just competence. I felt something unclench in a place I hadn't realized was braced. One night, washing dishes in my little sink, I thought about the moment in the courtroom when the judge asked if I'd slept in my car and the air changed. Shame had wanted to live in that sentence. It didn't get to. I'd like to say I vanquished it alone. I didn't. I had a brother-uncle who showed up at a coffee counter at 10:17 a.m., a lawyer who liked verbs, an accountant who speaks spreadsheet, a professor who saw me, and a father who left me a tea wrapped in a bandana because he knew love sometimes needs to be notarized. If you're new here, you can probably tell I'm not great at the part where I ask for things. But if this story matters to you, tap like so the algorithm doesn't bury it and subscribe so you catch the last part. I still have to tell you about the gift I gave Diana the last time I saw her, how Walter and I decided what to do with the business, and the thing inside Dad's flash drive that changed what I thought I knew about why the Thursday lunches ended. That's next. The last time I saw Diana was not inside the solemn air of the courtroom nor at the glittering tables of lawyers, but as I walked out of the courthouse, on the threshold of a gray afternoon. Her shoulders were squared back but her gaze was broken, as if the scaffolding that held her certainty had been torn down and her body left suspended for a moment. For weeks I had carried a slim, flat envelope in my backpack. Inside was no anger, no triumph, just record, my side of the world. When our eyes met, I handed it over. "What is this?" she asked. "Copies," I said. "Dorm invoices you claimed were paid but weren't. Receipts for textbooks you called unnecessary. Notices of bounced transfers. So you can see what it looked like from my side." She opened the envelope. The lines on her face tightened, then softened, then turned unreadable. She didn't speak. I didn't wait. I walked out into the cold. For the first time, I realized the silence I had carried on my shoulders for years was never mine to bear. That was the gift I left her. Unvarnished truth. Black letters that could not be erased, only acknowledged. Walter was waiting on the steps. "I won't ask what you gave her," he said, not like a lawyer but like a brother. "Sometimes the only gift left is the record itself." From that day on, life wasn't perfect, but finally it was mine. When the court approved Walter not as temporary guardian but as the official trustee, we began gathering each month around the reports Maya prepared. For the first time, numbers weren't a foreign language but an alphabet I was being taught. My father's company turned into a boring company, and I learned that boredom can be the most liberating sound. Boredom means cash in the drawer, transparency in supply, no surprises in the budget. At school, I slowly became visible again. Dr. Patel took me on as a research assistant. Hours spent among footnotes and case studies reminded me that my mind could still create, not just survive. On Saturdays, I went to the coffee shop and met morning customers' milk foam tantrums with calm, because the rhythm of normalcy heals. With Dr. Morales in therapy, I learned that hypervigilance was not a flaw but a strategy that had once kept me alive. Now we were teaching it a new job. Sit on the couch with shoes off, place the backpack on the floor instead of my lap, open the window at 3 a.m. without planning where to park the car. Then I opened the flash drive. It had sat on my desk for weeks. Every evening I'd look at it and say, tomorrow. One Sunday night after Walter and I cleared dinner, I plugged it in. 3 folders, letters, Thursdays, future. In letters were my father's words. Reminders about oil changes, guidance on choosing friends who laugh with you more than at you. Some were short. Use your intelligence gently, not like a sharp blade. Some were long. Regrets after losing Mom, shame that pushed him away from Walter, confessions of misunderstanding a deal and hiding instead of admitting. "If Diana ever confuses ambition with stewardship," he wrote, "remind her the line belongs to you." Something shifted inside me as if a missing piece had finally clicked into place. Thursdays held receipts, notes scribbled with blueberry, Walter liked it, even a blurry photo of the two of them. At the bottom was one line: "The Thursdays stopped not because I stopped loving my brother but because I listened to shame. Instead of admitting he was right, I withdrew. Don't inherit the pride. Inherit the pancakes." I read it 3 times, then called Walter. "He wanted pancakes," I said. Walter laughed like a boy. Future was more than financial safeguards. It was dreams. A draft of a scholarship in Mom's name for first-generation business students. A speech he had half-written, leaving the ending blank. The rest is yours to say. I cried, laughed, and cried again. That night I told Walter, let's do it. We named it the Lavender Room Fund, after my lavender-painted childhood room. At the launch, when the first recipient's eyes widened, I saw how a cycle breaks. Written proof that someone didn't give up on you. I also returned to the company, not as an executive but as a shadow. The new CEO invited me to a production planning meeting. No heroes here, he said. When everyone does their job right, nothing dramatic happens. His voice was as calm as the numbers. Afterward I went to the warehouse. A foreman my father used to joke with greeted me. Your dad used to carry you on his shoulders here, he said. Now the papers are with you, the load's with us, but they're lighter. I looked him in the eye. Thank you. You can inherit loyalty even from a stranger. Sometimes I walked backward into the garden of my childhood, into Mom's roses. Diana had erased Mom's face from frames but not from the soil. Walter and I planted lavender again. With my hands in the dirt, I heard my therapist's words. The body learns safety by touch. That night, washing the soil off, I smiled at the stubborn traces in the mirror. Something was growing again. I never saw Diana again. Brandon and Zoe moved away. The only trace was legal records of settlement terms. They sent a card in autumn. Time heals everything. I didn't reply. Sometimes doors once shut make the house warmer. The real battle was with the policeman inside me. The one who had whispered for years which parking lot was safest, how far to crack the window, which cafe bathroom to cry in. I had to thank him and retire him. I hired new officers. The morning sun officer opens the curtains. The vegetable chopping officer matches breath to the rhythm of the knife. The notebook officer catches midnight what if thoughts and holds them until morning. I volunteered at a campus center for invisible homelessness. At the desk no one asks why. They ask, did you eat breakfast? They hand out shower schedules, study space, a cup of tea. I knew because I had once been one of those faces begging silently, don't ask. Now when a freshman showed up with hair in a bun, clutching a notebook, I didn't just tell her which library couch stayed free until 11. I sat with her, wrote the email together, explained how to phrase the scholarship essay. Maybe the world doesn't change, but that night does. Walter and I made Sunday evenings about pancakes and fund reports. Transparency starves ghosts, he said. Maya translated in finance speak. We're chasing habit, not just process. We brought that habit to company policy. We put the word stewardship on the boardroom wall and discussed each month where trust could fracture. One day a supplier offered an unusual discount. Why so generous? I asked. Contract extension, the CEO said. Then let's make contracts public bid, I replied. Goodwill is a slippery floor. The company stayed boring. I learned boring sounds like peace. As graduation approached, my thesis became invisible housing insecurity among university students. Institutional response models. Dr. Patel stayed up late editing with me. The opening sentence didn't describe 3 months in my car. It described emergency funds and meal cards. Don't write a story, write policy, he said. My story leaked in anyway because my words carry my body. Graduation morning. Gown pressed, hair fixed, heart in another rhythm. Walter in the stands clapped for 3 people. As I took the diploma, the little girl inside me stood tall. Behind the stage, my phone buzzed. Dr. Morales, breathe. I did. Under the gown, I whispered, I'm not going back to the car. That night, Walter handed me an envelope. Inside was a new page of his will, naming me as daughter in everything but blood. I couldn't speak. Family is an accident, Walter said, but sometimes you choose it twice. I tucked the page beside Mom's lavender scarf. A year later, I met the first student funded by our scholarship, a nursing assistant working night shifts while attending classes. Without this, I would have dropped out, she said. Her eyes reminded me of my own reflection in a car window. This money is yours, I said. Not just money. A weight off your shoulders. Sometimes numbers in a bank lift desperation. In the flash drive's 3rd folder, I had overlooked one more file, titled Locks. Dad had listed the people he trusted, bankers, accountants, lawyers, And why? At the bottom, Walter's name. The one man who will never leave you halfway. Just then my phone rang. Walter, pancakes. Strawberry, I said. Today calls for strawberry. Life after that summer in the car became a series of firsts. My first vacation without hiding anything. A cheap seaside town, phone on airplane mode, sunburn instead of fear. My first new sheets. Floral, the clerk said, you'll sleep like spring. My first glass bought just because I liked it. Thin rim, wavy edge, even water looked elegant inside. I did something I had postponed for years. I went to Mom's grave. I brought a sprig of lavender. I did it, I whispered. I graduated. I reclaimed what was mine. Walter's okay. The wind rustled branches. Somewhere a child laughed. I wasn't alone. Behind me I felt a line of women stretching back, starting with Mom. You're tired, they seemed to say. But you made it. That night at home, the night watchman inside me quietly hung up his keys. At the company, an old supplier called. Your father once told me, we don't need a contract, but let's sign anyway for principle. His principles saved me from bankruptcy. Now it's my turn. He offered a discount. Signed, I said. Because principle. I underlined stewardship again on my desk. My volunteer work grew into a job. We started a small fund called Chair and Key, because sometimes all someone needs is a seat and a door. No ID required. One girl arrived late at night with summer school papers spilling out of her bag. Telling her, you can't stay here, would have been denying my own story. Instead I said, that room is empty. Microwave there. Kettle on that shelf. If security asks at 3, give them my name. That night I didn't look at my car's back seat. One autumn evening Walter told me, I never told you the full story of why your dad and I stopped Thursdays. I was hiding cancer, he was hiding shame. We thought we were protecting each other. We weren't. I cut him off. You protected me. He shook his head. You protected yourself. We just kept the record. I love that phrase, keeping the record. Today I do the same. Records stop voices from suffocating. They make them echo. Occasionally news of Diana reached me via my lawyer. She had completed community service, was barred from finance work, ended up in a small town shop. Brandon sold his car. Zoe finished art school online. None of it mattered to me. What mattered was, sometimes justice lands. Not always. But this time, yes. Years later, the fund had dozens of students. Each opening ceremony I repeated, this money is the result of your talent, your hard work, and one man's love for his daughter. One recipient hugged me. Someone finally gave me a pillow, she said. Not just money. A pillow. I smiled. Pillows matter, I said. When the company board asked me to join officially, I hesitated. Too soon. I'm still learning to breathe. The CEO smiled. We need leaders who breathe. I agreed on one condition, an emergency worker fund. If an employee's child got sick, if rent fell behind, if a car broke down, there'd be a door to knock on. It passed unanimously. That night I opened Dad's flash drive again. In future he had typed, employee fund? I marked, done. At home I started rituals. First Friday each month, lamp off ritual. 1 lamp only, slow dinner, quiet breath. Mid-month, drawer check. Emergency bag, food, notebook. I'd write, today safe. Sometimes the words came at night. Sometimes in the morning. Negotiation with myself became an act of love. At the cafe, an old man ordered the usual. Instead of a heart, I drew a small house in the foam. Heart was nicer, some said. He smiled. House is better. Heart lives inside. One student funded by our program became an intern at our company. In a meeting she corrected my draft. Don't write we don't do. Write we do. Positive framing is stronger. She looked at me. You taught me. I shook my head. It was already in you. I just gave it a name. One day the university provost called. I heard your talk, he said. We want a joint housing fund. We built a quick response system. No forms, just a card with 3 nights in a hotel, grocery credit, counseling appointment, shower key. The next year the university called it a model. When asked about fraud risk, I answered, if someone abuses it, they waste 3 nights. But if someone needs it and we deny them, that night lasts forever. The room went silent. Then applause. I couldn't see where it came from, I was crying. Walter sometimes still arrives late. I order 2 breakfasts, plain and blueberry. The waitress doesn't blink. It's tradition now. Walter says, "You ordered too much again," but eats the blueberries. "Your father did the same," he says with the glow of an old kitchen light in his eyes. In those moments Dad's words echo. Don't inherit the pride. Inherit the pancakes. One evening I left a note on my door for the young couple next door with a baby. "If you need a bottle warmer, ring." At dawn they did. We waited together while the milk steamed. The mother whispered, "I feel like I have no one, until you left that note." Inside me I once thought the same. Out loud, "I'm here. The note will stay." Sometimes I still wake at night. Headlights outside trigger the siren in my chest. I walk to the kitchen, fill my delicate glass, sit down. I watch the water. I sip and tell myself, "You don't read invoices and headlights anymore." That sentence is ritual. The body understands ritual. The lavender room fund grew. So did Mom's lavender. We planted with students, workers, neighbors. Walter said, "This is boring work, same every month. But gardens grow from it." We laughed. Then dug quietly. At a conference I spoke. Legal texts are stretchers for human stories. Carrying a stretcher is technical. But what lies on it is alive. Under mine lay Levin's pen, Maya's charts, a judge's curiosity, a DA's patience, Walter's hand, Mom's scarf. I didn't ask, "What about yours?" Instead I said, "Keep records." Without them, stories weigh down the shoulders. On the way home my phone rang. "Dr. Patel, your thesis results are in. Congratulations." That night I dropped blueberries into a pan. They sizzled. I let myself remember the first night in the car, not as a trap but as a beginning. If not for that night, this one wouldn't exist. But now it no longer owned me. I owned it. Maybe you're listening, wondering, what then? The magic of then is that small, steady things build the big ones. Open the window. Boil water. Answer the email. Sign the report. Approve the scholarship. Tell a child, "We're proud." Cover an employee's tow truck. Eat pancakes on Thursday. Keep the sentences short. Keep the record. So let me close with this, written to myself, maybe one day for someone else. Dear Samantha, one night you'll sit in a car seat that isn't yours to guard. Remember 3 things. 1. The shame is not yours. Shame is a language the powerful use to bury what they can't face. Choose your own language. 2. Asking for help isn't draining power, it multiplies it. Sometimes it takes 2 hands to pass through a door. One on the knob, one on your back. 3. Keep the record. Paper is sometimes a breathing tube. A signed sentence can stitch your heart back into your chest. And last, inherit the pancakes. Not the pride. If you stayed until the end of this video, I know, stories aren't just heard by ears but by bones. If my story touched one of your bones, tap like, subscribe. Algorithms love records. More importantly, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. A bus, a library, a cafe stool, maybe a car backseat. Wherever you are, know this, the door opens. And when it does, you walk through. I walked. You will too. Because doors don't open when you're ready. They open when you keep the record. And someone will hold the stretcher for you. Thank you.